This is the Pension Review Board Principles of Retirement Plan Design Advisory Committee meeting. And I would ask Mr. Scheitel, please, to call the roll.
Chair Keith Brainerd.
Here.
Stephanie Levy.
Here.
Josh McGee.
Here.
Okay, we're all here and accounted for. Thank you. First item on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting, which was March 1st, 2018. I would entertain a motion to suspend reading of those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It passes unanimously. Any discussion, proposed revisions to the minutes from the last meeting, March 1st? If not, I would entertain a motion to move the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Seconded.
So moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It passes. Thank you. We are on to discussion to develop recommendations for the principles of retirement plan design, including comments received on the draft principles. And before we get knee-deep in those, I want to make a couple of comments. First, and the other members of the committee can embellish these or correct these as they wish, but I want to emphasize that these are intended to be principles. We don't pass laws, and we can't tell anybody how to do anything here. They're just principles. They're the collective best practices for designing and administering a retirement plan that members of this committee and perhaps the members of the full Pension Review Board can come up with. If individual plans ultimately disagree with one or more components of what we come up with, obviously is your prerogative. And to the extent that you take a position that's different on how a retirement plan should be designed, if you can defend that to your board and your members and the legislature and whoever you have to defend it to, then that's fine. What we're trying to do is come up with what we think that are our best ideas or concepts for designing and perhaps administering a public retirement plan. With all of that said, I would also say that I read the comments, the public feedback that we received on these. I read every word of it. I read it twice. In certain instances, I feel humbled. Certain instances, I should have known better. And I very much appreciate the time that those who submitted comments took to, and the thought that you put into those. And with all of that, I'd like to ask Michelle Cranes, who's the PRV's deputy, to come up, and she's going to help us walk through these principles, proposed principles, and the comments that we received from the public. Michelle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you. I'm Michelle Cranes with Pension Review Board staff. We received comments from, I believe, 13 stakeholders spanning retirement systems and actuaries and others from across the state. Some of the comments were more general in nature, and my proposal was to lead you through principle by principle the more substantive or specific comments that you might consider, starting with the introduction and preamble.
Please.
On the introduction and preamble, one comment requested adding retirees and beneficiaries to the list of public sector stakeholders mentioned. And a second comment suggested rewording the opening paragraph of the preamble to speak to maintaining adequate plan design rather than structuring new plans.
Thank you. What is the will of the committee? Do you want to take these sort of on a comment by comment or principle by principle basis, so we could stop now and talk about what she's presented so far?
I think it would be great to do it principle by principle, and then maybe Michelle could highlight what she thinks is really important, but also we can just kind of go ad hoc, because I'm guessing that each of us has something that we think is really important or a great way to approach it, and so we don't have to necessarily go through all the comments, just at the high points.
Okay. So she's made a couple of suggestions with regard to the preamble. One of those suggested adding retirees and beneficiaries as stakeholders in public pension plans. What are the thoughts of the members of the committee?
I am fine with this.
I'm
Yep.
fine.
Yep, me also. So I would suggest that the opening sentence say the PRB recognizes that retirement benefit is vital to attainment of the objectives of multiple public sector stakeholders, including employers, employees, retirees, beneficiaries, and taxpayers, and that benefits should be protected through sound plan design and adequate funding.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I had, in our previous draft, had assumed that employees included the interests of retirees and beneficiaries, but of course they're different groups, so.
Right.
I'm not sure if this is what you included just a moment ago, but one of the comments that we received referred to the principles that we're contemplating going beyond plan design, which is a point I found to be well taken. And I'd like to propose to the committee that we consider expanding the title of these to read Pension Review Board Principles of Retirement Plan Design and Administration.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. The only concern that I would have there is administration could also get into, of course, we speak to some administrative elements, operational elements here, but we don't go into governance and some other things. So that would be my only concern there. But
I think my preference is to leave as is. I mean, on some respects, I'm kind of indifferent, but I think administration may be a little bit deeper than where this document currently is, and I don't think that it truly speaks to the administration of plans. And I understand the comments that are made, but I think a lot of the comments regarding administration are kind of tied to funding, which works into structure.
Okay, let's leave that there for the moment. That is to say, let's not include "and administration," although I would ask that we, after we've gone through these, we might reconsider that. Just for sake of reading ease, I'd like to suggest the second line of the preamble say, therefore, the PRB intends for these principles, without restating what the principles are, just these principles, to guide and inform public retirement systems, rather than to say to provide guidance and information to help. So it's just a little tighter.
yeah, I think your 8th grade English teacher would be proud.
Thank you. Is that okay with you, Stephanie? And then we add a to later in, so that sentence would read, therefore the PRB intends for these principles to guide and inform public retirement systems and their associated governmental entities to structure sustainable retirement systems. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. That's all I had on the introduction and preamble. Moving to principle number 1, we received one comment which asked to consider clarifying whether mandatory participation should apply to all employees or certain types of employees, suggested allowing plan sponsors to set participation standards.
Okay, what's the will of the committee? Do you think that we need to clarify that public employers should offer a retirement benefit and participation in the employer-sponsored retirement plan should be mandatory? Should we embellish that? We could say should be mandatory for employees who work in a permanent or long-term capacity, or we could leave it as understood that retirement plans are free to apply participation as they see fit, which most do. Certainly, typically, temporary public employees will not participate in the defined benefit plan. Those who work, for example, fewer than 20 hours a week typically will not participate in the pension plan. What's the will of the committee?
My suggestion would be to leave as drafted.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that any change we make is going to step into definitions of different types of employees, and that just gets super tricky. I don't think that's our job.
Okay, I'm fine with that too. I would offer an amendment to number 1, and that is to strike the clause to their employees. So it simply reads, public employers should offer a retirement benefit and participation in the employer-sponsored primary retirement plan should be mandatory.
I agree with that.
I as well.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. There were no comments on principle number 2. On principle 3, we received, 2 comments. The first suggesting that sharing the cost of the benefit could imply equal cost sharing, and the second arguing that limiting volatility in employee contributions should be a part of this principle.
My suggestion to the members of the committee would be that we alter the wording of number 3 to say as follows: both employers and employees should contribute toward the cost of the benefit. That way no one can read it as saying or inferring that or implying that that cost must be borne equally.
So adding both and changing should share to contribute to the cost.
Correct.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
I prefer the word, sorry.
You
I
like
prefer share.
Why?
Well, because I think, as we've seen in the recent past, when times are tough and there are contributions or there are adjustments to be made to retirement plans, a lot of times the employee group bears that through reduction in pension benefits, and that should be viewed as in some way sharing the ultimate cost of the benefit. And it's not a direct contribution that comes out of pocket, but it is a way in which they share in future costs, and that's by taking less.
How do we not, it seems to me that we get there through this wording as well, but we also alleviate the concern that share implies equally.
I mean, frankly, I'm fine with either way. I did not read share as being equally. I mean, you could strain yourself and interpret contribute to be equally too. Equal doesn't appear in either situation, and they mean the same thing. So I'm not truthfully married to either. I am somewhat swayed by Stephanie's argument around there are other ways to share. I think there are other ways to contribute. Either construction is, I think, fine.
Let me take
I
just
didn't help, did I?
well, no, that's helpful. Let me take one moment out as a slightly off topic and say, all of you have come to a big wordsmithing session, and so this might be painful. Just bear with us as we work through this. Seeing folks, policymakers, and others adjust language from the dais is painful. I know it's painful for us too. So let's just work through it. So I sense that my two fellow committee members would like to just keep number 3 as written.
Unless we think there's a strong reason to change it.
Can you restate your justification for keeping it as is, as opposed to saying contribute toward?
Well, I think, once again, maybe I'm reading into it, but I think of contributions as something that you physically put in your employee portion.
Yeah, the dollars that flow
The
into the
dollars
plan.
that flow into the plan. But when there comes a time and there's not enough money to repay future benefits, employees share in the cost of those future benefits by agreeing to take less through benefit reductions.
It seems to me that you're bringing a different issue in here, and that is, this principle number 3 is talking about money in, and what you're bringing in is money out. It's blending a separate issue. If we want to add or discuss a principle on benefit reductions and whether and how those should be made, I think that we could consider that, but that should be separate from the money in factor. I think part of the genesis of this is that in a corporate defined benefit plan, for example, employees pay all of it. And it wasn't very long ago that there were a number of public defined benefit plans among states and local governments in which it was non-contributory for the employee. The employer contributed toward all of it. a number of best practices that I've seen, such as, for example, the Government Finance Officers Association and think tanks that have come up with retirement plan design concepts or best practices, have indicated that one best practice for funding a retirement benefit in the public sector is for both employees and employers to share in the cost of the benefit. And so I think you raise a very interesting point in terms of the way that you look at this, because when I look at it, I think only money in, and obviously you looked at it as possible money out as well. And I think that from that we could say that if we want to add or discuss adding a principle in which what happens under circumstances if there need to be benefit reductions, we should consider that, but in my view that should be separate from the money in principle.
I guess I didn't, and I think it was one of the things that I noticed looking through the comments. I tried to read the principles in their totality so that they flowed through each other, and I didn't look at any one principle as applying only to that one sector of the retirement plan, because you need them in their totality to come up with a holistic plan at the end of the day.
Good. So I gave it my best shot. You want to stick with the original language?
I'm still in favor of sticking with the original language.
Okay. We look to you as the tiebreaker.
I'm fine with original.
All right. You getting this on
Yes.
Principle 4, please.
Principle 4 received some attention from commenters. Folks mentioned the employer's needs and interests in budgetary needs as well as retention needs. They also discussed setting a number at all, while others discussed setting 5 as the number in particular. Commenters also, few talked about the lack of an age or retirement eligibility component and that those should be considered. And finally, a general comment was made that it suggested clarifying vesting only applies to benefits associated with employer contributions. How did I do at summarizing those?
Really good.
Okay. Josh?
I'll just put a stake in the ground. I wasn't very swayed by the comments on this one. I think that for a primary retirement plan, one of the key goals is retirement security, and the longer you go out investing, the weaker the retirement security of the plan. And frankly, given the empirical literature on some of the stuff they're talking here, a retirement plan is just not a very good workforce management tool. So I'm just not at all swayed by this. I would recommend, I think that somebody had a comment here, changing the end to say preferably 5 years or less. So just instead of saying not to exceed, saying preferably, I'm fine weakening that language a little bit. But I think that we should stay in favor of short vesting for retirement security reasons.
Stephanie, did you have thoughts about Principle 4?
I think on the spectrum of people, I'm probably not as tied to the language in 4 as what you guys were at our prior meetings. But I definitely think that I could go along with a loosening from not to exceed to preferably 5 years or less.
Okay. I was a little more swayed than the other members of the committee on
How
some.
many words did you add?
I thought it might be helpful to add a little clarity about what it is that we're trying to accomplish with vesting. So I'm going to throw this out and let y'all share your thoughts on it. Vesting in the retirement benefit should occur over a short period, preferably 10 years or less, to balance the need of employees to accumulate retirement financial security with the needs of employers to retain qualified employees and to recover their investment in hiring and training workers. So what this does is identify the objectives for both employers and employees of vesting, having a vesting period. And obviously I've changed the preferably length of service from 5 to 10 in deference to a number of the public safety plans who, as you read, expressed concern about shorter vesting periods being a potential impediment to their ability to retain.
I have a relatively strong preference to keep it pretty simple and keep it towards the shorter end. I mean, I think that what you propose is not terrible. It has a lot of words, and I'm really just not swayed by the folks who say that. So if you move your vesting period from 5 to 10, there's just not much action there on retention. There's zero empirical basis that I've seen for believing that has a ton of retention impact. It does, on the other hand, lower the cost of the benefit because if people leave there, that money gets recycled for folks who stay longer. But you do take a hit on the retirement security of those people. I don't think there's enough of a basis here to extend this out. I think we should have a preference for shorter, and plans can do what they want based on their specific situation and the preferences of their board and their members.
Stephanie, you have thoughts about it?
I don't have very many thoughts about this one. I think originally I was probably more along the lines of thinking that it worked for retention and that discretion should be given, or discretion's still given to the plan sponsor. But I think when I sat back and thought about what benefits would look like at the end of the day, from a retiree's perspective, I don't think if I was a retiree, wouldn't want to have 4 or 5 year retirement plans and look at that for retirement security at the end of my working life. That if this is really something that I was looking for and counting on, then it would be up to me as the employee to stay at one place for a longer period of time. So I really don't have so much preference when it comes to this language.
What if we consider blending the original language with, I think it's the final suggestion. No, it was Mr. Fenlaw's suggestion, so it's the bottom of page 4 of our packet. Retirement plan vesting should occur over a short period and be appropriate for the type of employees covered by the plan.
For me, I just disagree with the appropriate for employees of the plan. That sentiment is something that I disagree with. That should be strong. That somehow there should be longer vesting periods for public safety versus others. Just doesn't conceptually make sense to me. I don't know that there's a strong justification for this. I haven't heard a justification for that that makes real logical or empirical sense. So I disagree with that wording. I think that so anchoring to that is not something that I'm excited about.
You like the principle as written?
I like the principle as written. I would be happy to consider changes if there were something that didn't point so heavily towards using this as a workforce management tool, or so heavily towards appropriateness to type of employee. I could be convinced, but to the extent that that's where we strengthen, that is just not convincing to me. And I think there's a lot of discretion here anyway. I mean, we're saying we just want it to be short. We prefer it to be 5 years. We're not. That's weakening of that language. I think that to not to exceed was pretty strong. So I think weakening that puts the ball firmly back in others' court to be convincing that longer period is better for their particular situation.
So one change that you, if I understand you correctly, might agree with would be to say retirement plan vesting should occur over a short period of time, and instead of saying not to exceed, say preferably 5 years or less. Is that what we had suggested?
Yeah.
Other changes that members of the committee might like to make to this principle? You okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
What I'd like to say is before we vote finally on this, we'll get comments from members of the public. So we'll do that for now, and we may revisit it. We may revisit any of them. On to number 5.
Okay, on number 5, we received a comment from one of our multi-employer plans that, as written, the principal may not cover cash balance plans. And the remaining comments primarily fell along the line of eligibility and age not being addressed, or that replacement income language should be separated from age and eligibility language. An alternative language was proposed for both of those.
I thought the cash balance point was well taken. I'd like to suggest for the committee's consideration the following. Benefits should be designed to place employees on the path to financial security in retirement in consideration of participation or non-participation in Social Security. So we are striking replace a designated portion of employee salary and striking all and adding financial security in retirement. So instead of suggesting targeting a replacement rate, we're saying financial security in retirement, essentially. Because the justification is that a cash balance plan is sort of a difficult vehicle to establish a precise replacement of salary. It depends on so many factors, including the age at which the participant joins the plan, and also the investment performance, and age upon retirement.
Yeah, I agree with the flexibility of the change. And I think it's, for me, this is even more broad than just cash balance. It may be useful even for final average salary systems to point out that a more flexible approach and a broader approach to what we're actually trying to target. So placing all workers on the path to retirement security is I think, a great broad goal. The only question I would have, so you said financial security in retirement?
On the path to financial security in retirement, yeah.
As opposed to, Joe Newton had suggested adequate retirement income?
Yeah, I prefer to avoid words like adequate.
Got it. And financial security meets the sniff test for you?
I'm not sure how else I would say it.
Got it. Financial security. Financial security is fine with me. Another way to say it would just be to shorten it to retirement security, but that might also just be have some other connotation that is not. I don't know.
I agree. It could have another connotation.
And then you dropped appropriate retirement ages. So you said on the path to financial security in retirement, in consideration of participation or non-participation in Social Security.
Yes, sir.
So we're just dropping the age concept.
Yes, sir.
I'm fine with that. Yep.
I'm good.
Anu, did you get that?
Yep.
Thank you. On to 6.
On Principle 6, commenters asked for clarification that a large lump sum distribution be discouraged versus partial lump sum, for example. Also asked to clarify that the principle applies to the mandatory primary retirement plan, not a supplemental. And finally, suggested adding language specifically about drops.
I did not come prepared with alternative language to number 6.
The only change that was convincing to me was the primary part, and I think that takes into account the drop as well. So if we added a primary retirement plan should require annuitization of a substantial portion of retirement benefits, to add the word primary, I think it fixes both of those concerns. And we've used primary elsewhere in the document.
You okay with that, Stephanie?
I can go with that.
I am also. 7.
Principle 7 received comments that distributions for financial need are not usually applicable to DB plans, suggested deleting the first half of the sentence, as well as suggesting that the principle should address when benefits should be available rather than how they're actually used. And that was all.
I have suggested alternative language, and I think that's consistent with one of the suggestions, and that is to strike the first clause of the sentence so that it would read, a retirement benefit should be used only for retirement.
So I think I'm generally fine with striking the first half of that sentence, but my recollection of our prior committee meetings was that we inserted that language specifically based on testimony that came from some of the retirement systems about some of the needs that their employees face in times leading up to retirement. And I don't recall exactly who it was, but there was one person who got up and spoke about an employee who had terminal cancer and the need to kind of tap into some of that money to pay for ongoing medical needs, and that was kind of the reason why that was put in here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it seems, I think that we should have a very strong preference for using retirement savings just for retirement. I don't think that it makes any sense to, in our principles, say that you should lock it completely away, and no matter what is going on in a person's life, they can never touch the savings that they've got. That strikes me as just not being the right approach. Now, I mean, we could talk about.
I mean, it does say should, so,
Yeah.
I mean, you do have some degree of permissiveness through the use of should. But I just wanted to point out that it was really drafted this way kind of intentionally to allow some of that flexibility.
And I'm not swayed by the first comment. I think that there are many defined benefit designs that allow some withdrawal under financial hardship or loan against or something. So it's not overly common in final average salary systems, but I've seen instances where that's done.
I agree. Okay, I am content to leave 7 as originally written, if that's the consensus of the committee.
Okay, on 8, we received one comment asking for clarification whether this principle means that COLAs should be a mandatory component of a retirement plan.
I mean, I feel about this one like I do some of the other ones. We're suggesting that, yes, it should be a component of a retirement plan, but we're not saying it super strongly. So,
What do we think about merging 8 and 9? Retirement benefits should be protected against erosion of the value of the benefit from inflation, semicolon. If a cost of living adjustment is provided, it should be funded in accordance with the PRB's pension funding guidelines. and should not exceed the actual rate of inflation.
You want to combine 8 and 9.
Yes, sir.
What are some of the alternative ways that benefits are protected against erosion other than cost of living? Is there another?
The only other one that I am aware of, so another way that inflation can eat away at benefit levels is, let's say you separate from service prior to normal retirement age and you have to defer your benefit. And when you do retire, your benefit is based on the salary number from back in the day, and these plans generally don't adjust for inflation there. There are a couple of plans, Wisconsin being one, that adjusts for the salary for inflation. So that's the only other way that inflation can play in, but COLA is the primary, after you have retired, making sure that your benefit has stable value in the face of inflation is the primary way.
There are some plans, I don't know how many in Texas do this, but some plans provide a so-called 13th check. I don't know if that's commonly considered to be a cost of living adjustment as much as it is sort of a bonus. And it's much less prevalent now than it was back when investment returns were higher than they have been.
Interesting to think about the concept of giving retirees a bonus.
Yeah, that was another place. I recently worked with a municipal retirement plan located in the eastern half of the United States that until just recently gave retiring members a choice. You could take the COLA, which at the time until recently was automatic 3%, or you could take a higher retirement multiplier, which basically built in an assumed 3% COLA. It was the present value of a 3% COLA based on the retiree's projected lifespan. So basically you're getting the full COLA of 3% baked in for life. And then after a while the plan realized that
Was not the best idea.
very expensive.
Yeah.
So that's another way, I suppose, of hedging against inflation, not a very good way.
Okay. I was just trying to determine whether or not, we would go with merging 8 or 9, or if COLA was the primary way that this was done, if 8 could be deleted in its entirety. But it sounds like there are other mechanisms through which you can protect against.
I would be open to combining the two. The thing that we want to capture here is retirement benefits should be protected from erosion from inflation. That when you give that benefit, that should be part of the pre-funding calculation. So don't do like Kentucky and give a COLA at the end of the year without any funding for it. That's just silly. And that those COLAs, if the purpose is to keep the benefit from eroding based on inflation, then it's got to be tied to actual inflation. So I think those are the three pieces we want here. I don't immediately have a great way of combining all those in one, but I think that it might be valuable to do that.
Okay, what if it says this? Number 8, period. If provided, cost of living adjustments should be funded in accordance with the PRB pension funding guidelines, which addresses the one other issue you identified, and should not exceed the actual rate of inflation.
The only thing missing from that construction is our preference for COLA, for that inflation protection to be provided.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you.
So it says if provided COLAs, and the number 8 right now is written suggests that protection should be provided, so that COLAs should be a part of the benefit. And so if we do it the way you've worded it, we're taking away that recommendation, that preference that we have for COLAs being provided.
I see. And you're content to stay with should be protected against erosion. Okay, so we could strike if provided, keep number 8. Cost of living adjustments should be funded in accordance with, etc.
Read that again.
So we'll go with number 8 and then tack onto it cost of living adjustments should be funded in accordance with the PRB's pension funding guidelines and should not exceed the actual rate of inflation.
So 2 sentences?
Yes, we could put a semicolon in there and make it one sentence.
I'll just note that, for the record, Michelle is laughing at us editing this up here. I mean, it could say something like retirement benefits should be protected against erosion of the value of the benefit from inflation, and such benefits should be funded in accordance with blah,
Great.
blah, blah.
Great.
Yeah. It's a long sentence, but it works.
Yep.
Did you guys get that?
Yep.
You okay with that, Stephanie?
I am fine with that.
Number 10.
10. One comment on number 10, asking for clarification of the terms adequate and death benefits.
My suggestion to the committee would be to revise number 10 to read, a retirement plan should be accompanied by death and disability benefits. So we get rid of the word adequate. We're just saying that that it should be accompanied by death and disability. And it keeps us out of the, the business of, well, the obvious question, what's adequate?
It also opens up the possibility that the employer may want to provide those outside the plan instead of through the plan.
I agree with that. And it's a point very well taken. I believe TMRS, they may have said this in their comments, I don't recall. But I believe that a number of TMRS employers provide death and disability, but it's not the TMRS that provides that, is that right? So it's not the TMRS that's doing it.
So
The
should
employer.
we, instead of saying accompanied by, in many times we reference employer specifically, so we could say employer should provide death and disability benefits and just drop adequate. So change it, instead of a retirement plan being the subject here, say employers should provide death and disability benefits.
I'm fine with it. It a bit belies the title, retirement plan design, but I'm fine with it.
I mean, the reason it's here is because in a lot of plans is provided it's the insurance product that is annuitization and retirement plan and death and disability benefits are quashed together. Really, they're two different things.
Yep.
So, but I think it's absolutely necessary as part of our principles that this is, because they're traditionally quashed together, we've got to say it.
Employers should provide death and disability benefits. Does that
I'm
do it?
fine with that.
Okay. So that's the new number 10, which actually will be number 9 after we merge 8 and 9, right?
Yep.
Number 11, please.
For number 11, commenters asked for clarification on what types of plans were intended by the use of the word supplemental, whether that included essentially defined contribution plans such as a 457.
My suggestion for the committee's consideration is to say employers are encouraged to provide employees with access to a supplemental retirement plan such as a 457 or a 403B plan.
It's very specific.
I was fine with the language that was proposed by Houston Municipal. Employers are encouraged to sponsor plans that are supplemental to the retirement plan, such as a deferred compensation plan.
I'm fine with that also.
I would be fine with it as long as we insert the word primary, just because that's the construction we've used in other places.
To the primary
To the
retirement
primary?
plan.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I don't know that we really need such as at the end of that.
we
So
can
could
strike that.
Drop the such as clause,
Okay.
because who knows what kind of plans are going to be available, what the IRS code designation is going to be for them down the road.
So it would read, employers are encouraged to sponsor plans that are supplemental to the primary retirement plan. Ready for 12?
Okay. On 12, we received comments suggesting that minimizing costs and considering stakeholder interests beyond the benefit of beneficiaries could come into conflict with certain fiduciary duties. And alternative language was proposed, for example, reasonably minimize costs, or to replace minimize cost with defray reasonable expenses, which is the language used in Texas Government Code. And several other comments regarding personal and financial information. I think that goes to the transparent piece of this, perhaps, and that governance is about processes, not structures.
This was one of the principles on which I should have known better, in part. And also, I think that some of the points were well taken, but I think some of the points also were based on too narrow a reading of what a governance structure is. To me, and I think that I think everybody ought to agree with this, a governance structure goes beyond the board. A governance structure is all policymakers and others who can exercise influence over the plan. In the case, for example, of a state, you've got the governor and the legislature, as well as the board, and the top staff also. So I take a broader view of what the governance structure is, and I do think that that governance structure should include and incorporate the interests of all stakeholders. My suggestion for a revision to number 12 is as follows, and it's shorter. Retirement plan governance structures should represent the interests of all stakeholders while upholding and respecting fiduciary standards. So it respects the role of the governance structure to represent stakeholders, and it respects the role of fiduciaries whose sole interest is the plan participants.
But are you leaving transparency and public accountability off the table?
Those are explicit or implicit in fiduciary standards.
I mean, so I have a hard, whenever we start, I think fiduciary means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and we've got some pretty convoluted governance structures here in the state of Texas. I mean, we've had some of them here today where the board was supposed to be a fiduciary, but also controlled benefit levels, couldn't force adequate contributions, and we had a situation where state law was in violation of city ordinance and collective bargaining. I just don't know that really captures what we mean, and I think maybe using a few more words, being a little less elegant and being specific might be useful.
Don't disagree that, particularly based on what we saw earlier today, which for those of you who were not here, was evidence of governance structures in which you've got stakeholder interests that are not aligned. And you've got some people who are free to pursue a certain path based on their interest, and other groups that are free to pursue a different path based on their interest, and the two never really come together. And it's creating a problem in some public pension plans in the state. I guess one question might be whether or not we can adequately address that in this principle. Do we want to add something about governance structures encouraging alignment of interests?
So whenever I read these comments, I'm just looking through them once again, I didn't see anything that led me to believe we should change a lot of this principle. what I came away with more is what you led with, which is we mean governance structures writ large to encompass fiduciary and so encompass the board and other policymakers. We want to capture everything is what we mean by governance structures. So lead with that, and then I say, look, the minimizes cost point, it comes up in the next one as well. Maybe we should, we don't want to minimize cost to the detriment of other key pieces. So maybe adjusting minimize cost would be useful. And then there's also investment allocation. We could say asset allocation instead of investment allocation, just as a more correct term of art on that one. But I came away more thinking that we just needed to tweak a couple of places instead of really wholesale rewrite on this one.
Okay, well, since you brought up minimize cost, I thought that the points were very well made, and that is, it is not the role of a retirement plan to minimize cost. It is the role of the retirement plan to maximize return within an acceptable level of risk. And maximize return implies cost minimization, but not always. When we sent a rocket to the moon, we did not put all lowest bidder parts in the rocket.
But minimized cost does not equal lowest bidder. A lot of the comments read as though they were reading minimized costs to be lowest bidder, but that's not. It's not minimum cost. It's minimizes.
If fiduciaries are doing their duty, they're minimizing cost. So in my view, if we add a reference to fiduciary duty, we are including cost minimization.
So two things on this. I'm a little bit swayed that we don't want to imply that we want to drive this completely towards zero. There are some, again, not to the detriment of other things. So there was a suggestion in the next one from HMEPS that said careful consideration to cost. I could see changing it in that way. Maybe, so another way, I could see weakening it a little bit in that way. I could also, or specifying it a little bit in that way. I could also see specifying minimizes administrative and investment cost. So actually just put in the key things that we actually do want to minimize.
Okay. How do you define minimizing cost? I know a plan that traditionally consistently has shot out, or many times shot the lights out in investment return. And they have done so by paying investment fees that are substantially higher than what the most public pension funds pay.
Yeah, there's an open question in my mind, so I think that is perfectly fine for Mr. Brainerd and his own money and whatever he has decision-making power over how he wants to invest. I think that gets a little bit tricky when we're talking about big public funds from a lot of different respects.
Yeah, but that's not our job to tell a public fund how to invest. If a public fund decides we're going to spend 100 basis points on this money manager who's going to beat the benchmark by 200 basis points, that is their decision to make. That's not our decision to make.
Yeah, I don't think we're forcing them to do that. I think that I guess I'm saying minimize costs is a feels to me like a middle way there, where we're not suggesting how they do it, but they should seriously consider what they're paying and what they're getting.
If they're doing their fiduciary duty, they are.
Yeah.
I think that you're placing a outsized emphasis on cost, when the purpose for investing the assets is not to minimize cost. It is to maximize return within an acceptable level of risk.
I don't know I agree with that statement. I think that that the goal should be to I think almost risk should lead there. I think that a big problem is we don't talk enough about risk.
Here's what I found.
Siri's going to help us with it. I agree with your lead statement, though, that I think that saying minimize cost emphasizes cost more than the outcomes you're seeking. So it could be read in such a way that that cost should be given a higher place than the outcomes you're trying to achieve. That being said, so I would be willing to figure out how to put the outcomes in here.
How about retirement plan governance structures should seek to align the interest of all plan stakeholders while upholding and respecting fiduciary standards?
I just don't know that we need to rewrite it that much. Can we just change it to, instead of minimize cost, can we adopt HMEP's comment, suggested language from 13 that says, gives careful consideration to costs, or something like that? So, represents the interest of all stakeholders, carefully considers costs, and are made in a transparent, public, accountable fashion.
Are you suggesting that you like the HMEP's
I know it's shocking, right?
proposal to read as follows: retirement plan assets should be pooled, professionally invested, and invested in a manner that gives careful consideration to costs?
Yes. On both places, I think that instead of minimize cost, we should say something about careful consideration of cost, or scrutiny of cost, or whatever it is. Which I think takes care of both of our concerns on this, that we shouldn't be suggesting.
Okay, I'm sorry, wait a second. You're getting ahead of us because you're addressing item 13. We're still on 12, Governor.
And I'm saying that I think that the comment from HMEPS on 13, I like that construction, and we use minimize cost in both 12 and 13. And that I think that, for me, just changing minimize cost to be carefully consider cost addresses any concerns I have with 12. I think it gets at the root of the concerns that you're trying to address on 12 and fixes 13. I'm trying to fix 2 at once.
Okay. Since we're addressing minimize cost in 13, why don't we leave it out of 12? Because 12 is about governance.
Well, there's admin costs, right? There are other costs other than investment.
And that's implied in the fiduciary reference. So if we suggest that governance structures should align interests and uphold and respect fiduciary standards, then we're getting a lot of this in there. We're getting cost minimization.
I don't know that we should say align, so I'm happy with represent interests of all stakeholders. What was your statement on fiduciary?
Uphold and respect fiduciary standards.
Do we need uphold and respect?
Not necessarily.
All right.
I can go with either or.
Respect fiduciary standards and are made in a transparent, public, accountable fashion. I'm fine dropping minimum cost there if we do that. But I think we should say represent interests of all stakeholders instead of align, because there's bound to be some misalignment. But we can represent and put it out in the open.
Well, what I was trying to fix is these examples that we encountered today.
Yep.
We have stakeholder interests that are not aligned, and we have vexing outcomes. Can you read the very last part of what you just said? Respect fiduciary standards and, did you say optimize?
No, I just said just keep the same, made in a transparent, public, accountable fashion. I understood Stephanie to say that she liked that last phrase, and I agree with that.
Okay.
That's the reason for our being.
Retirement plan, I'm going to read what I think that you're suggesting. Retirement plan governance structures should seek to represent the interests of all plan stakeholders while respecting fiduciary standards and be made in a transparent, and publicly accountable fashion.
Yeah, the only question that we should just explicitly consider is, do we actually want to drop the the asset allocation, benefit design, and actuarial assumptions from this?
Well, I think it's implied that these are the things that they do. Because they make other decisions too, and that we're not including.
Okay,
We want all their decisions to follow this
not just the
model.
ones we enumerate.
Right.
I am, I think, comfortable with that.
May I read it one more time? Retirement plan governance structures should seek to represent, can we strike seek to? Should represent the interests of all plan stakeholders.
Do we need to have plan?
Strike plan. Respect fiduciary standards. And be made in a transparent and publicly accountable fashion.
I think that, so before we had it where it was decisions related to, and so that final clause made sense. Now we've got to edit the final clause
Yeah.
to where
So
it is,
operate.
That's fine with me.
or are, maybe what if we just say and are transparent and publicly accountable?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good with, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
How you doing on that? All right?
Yep.
Michelle, you all right?
Yes, thank you. I'm great.
Did you take a coffee break?
13?
13. You've already discussed minimized costs, to which we received comments, of course. We also received multiple comments asking for clarification of the use of the term pooled.
What does the committee think?
I don't know. Are you really confused by pooled?
I found pooled to be adequate.
Yeah, I did too. The minimized cost is the only thing I had here, so in a manner that carefully considers cost or something like that, I'm fine with it.
Did you have desired changes to this? You liked it as is?
I am fine with accepting the gives careful consideration to costs in lieu of minimizes costs.
So are we okay with retirement plan assets should be pooled, professionally invested, and invested in a manner?
Too invested there, huh?
That gives careful consideration to cost. Is that what we want?
We could say retirement plan assets should be pooled and professionally invested, carefully considering, giving careful consideration to cost.
Yeah. Retirement plan assets should be pooled and professionally invested, giving careful consideration to cost.
Good.
Yes, sir.
On 14, we received two comments, both centered on the term diversified. One suggesting the principle be expanded to include that diversification is primarily a mechanism to minimize risk, and the other suggested that diversification is only one element of prudent investor standards and that the reference be removed.
My thought was that we had addressed all of 14 previously, and we could strike it.
You're saying we addressed it in 13 and 12 and 13?
Yes, sir.
I mean, the only reason I tend to agree with that statement. However, there are some of these principles that we're just calling it out because it's particularly important. So the question for me is this important enough to have its own principle?
Oh,
We've
okay.
taken asset allocation out of 12
It's true.
as we've moved to the more streamlined language. And so I think we should keep this in.
Okay. I actually had come prepared for language that merged 14 into 13 that I didn't read. Can I give it a shot here?
Sure.
Oh, man.
Retirement plan assets should be pooled, diversified, and I want to merge these two. And so what is it in 14 that we like? Do we like prudent investor standards?
I like the idea of merging the two. So I'm endorsing that. I don't have a solution for you. So I think I agree with the point that diversification is part of prudent investor standards. Again, the consideration is diversification something that we want to explicitly pull out and highlight? Is it important enough to have its own few words here?
Diversification?
Yeah. I'm not sure that it is.
Especially if we say prudent investor principles.
Yeah.
That implies diversification.
I think, so you could say retirement plan assets should be pooled, professionally invested according to prudent investor standards, giving careful consideration to cost.
Yes.
Should have been a writer.
Retirement plan assets should be pooled according
Pooled
Professionally
professionally
invested.
invested according to prudent investor.
principles,
Yep.
giving careful consideration to cost. If we do that, Stephanie, we can strike 14. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
You have that?
Yep.
We almost got down to 10. We
Aye.
end at 12.
Okay. Are there other changes the committee would like to consider right now before we hear from the public?
So I just had one suggestion, and I'm not sure if it would be in addition to the preamble or some kind of standalone disclosure, but and it kind of piggybacks off a comment I made at our last committee meeting, just about to the extent that there are differences between where these principles fall in current either state law or local law requirements related to these retirement systems. Just kind of some kind of disclaimer in this document that these principles are designed to be informative in nature and do not provide legal advice, and point out the fact that there may be some differences between current legal requirements related to these plans and these principles.
Does the statement in the preamble that says PRB intends for these principles to provide guidance and information to help public retirement systems and their associated government entities structure sustainable retirement systems, I kind of had read that as enough of a disclaimer. Just because we're just saying it provides guidance. Is that, do you want to go further than that?
I was thinking about that at the beginning of the meeting because when we tweaked that language earlier, I thought that may be enough, but I do think that I would. No, I think that's probably enough.
I mean, it's enough for me, and we can just stress it when we talk about it and roll it out, that this is all about guidance and information. This isn't...
Right. I mean, I was thinking if we should have an explicit statement that just says that these don't preempt state or local law. But I think just from a legal perspective, if you give, you know, the weight that you give to the specific authority, to the extent that there was any conflict, your state or local law would govern.
So you're comfortable with just provide guidance and information, the PRB intends these principles to provide guidance and information to,
Or to guide and inform.
man, we're simplifying here, I like it.
Oh, we did that at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Okay, based on the conversation we just had, do we wish to revisit the title to include and administration? Pension Review Board Principles of Retirement Plan Design and Administration, or you just want to keep it at design?
I vote as design.
Yeah, I'm fine with just design. I like simple.
Okay, other changes before we hear from the public?
Let's hear from people.
Okay. If anybody would like to comment on the principles and as they have been proposed for amendment here, this would be your opportunity. Please approach the podium and identify yourself.
Well, I'm not scared. I'll get this deal started.
We hadn't heard from you in a little bit.
Please state your name for the record.
David Stacy, trustee, Midland Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to preface that I appreciate the discussion and the effort, the good, presumably good faith effort to try to assist in exactly what your preamble you're agreeing to state. However, if anyone can sit here and look me in the eye or anyone else in the eye and say that guidelines, keyword guidelines, because I've heard that time and time again in various discussions, don't have a tendency to find their way into law, into statute. Because somebody, somewhere, is looking to do something with retirement systems. And so they go to the state agency, who has already hashed this all out, and they come up with whatever they do. Oh, yeah, we'll latch onto that. By God, here we are. So, with the gravity of that consideration, I make the comments that I make. Going to, I'll just go by the items. 4, in the vesting period, as I stated before, I strongly agree or strongly disagree with defining any vesting period. I strongly disagree that it is the retirement system's job to provide retirement security to the general public. It's the retirement system's job to provide retirement security for its members. The fact that a member elects, if there is a longer vesting period chosen for whatever reason by the plan sponsor or the plan, that an employee elects to, for whatever reason, not stay for whatever that vesting period is. In most cases in Texas, at a minimum, they're eligible to receive their employee contributions, in which case most government plans in Texas actually have employee contributions as a component of the benefit structure. I would offer that employee contribution is in fact a token, so to speak, that you can take and do whatever, as if you leave your prior to vesting and don't take advantage of a benefit at a later date. I think it's a dangerous, slippery slope for the PRB in the effort of defining solid principles of retirement system design to include vesting a time period. Define that time period. That's what that is. I take strong exception. I mean, I disagree very strongly with that. Moving to item 7, which this is, or Rule 7. This is kind of along the same lines. While I appreciate everybody wants to accommodate, and you could argue, well, the guy's dying of cancer, or the gal, whoever it is, and they've got this huge asset in an annuity that's going to be paid out over time that they're not going to be able to benefit from. And therefore, some consideration should be given to pay that out to them in some alternative form. In the public sector, that's why defined benefit plans are what they are. And anything that weakens the ability of that defined benefit structure to maintain that defined benefit to be paid for its intended purpose. And many plan designs, they have beneficiaries, typically. Okay, you've got the single person that has no children, that has no beneficiaries, and he's fixing to die, and we want to be fair. I would offer life just not fair. And that may not be good enough for everybody, and that may not be good enough for, from a governing standpoint, but there is nothing in life that's fair. And I think that also puts in jeopardy, it opens the door for, whether it be legally or otherwise, for an individual to seek benefits that they aren't otherwise eligible for because of extenuating circumstances. Going to 8 and 9, which you talked about kind of in combination, and as I recall, the last modification was the COLA did not exceed inflation. I would offer consideration that while medical costs are a component of inflation, and you've been privy to a lot of discussion about TRS and TRS care, and the ultimate how is this going to play out and how we're going to fund this, and the legislature is going to figure this out. I would offer that there may be creative plan design that seeks to offset to some extent medical care from retirement benefits, that medical care costs may exceed inflation costs, the rate of inflation. So if you tie that in there to that you can't exceed whatever inflation is, then you limit a plan's ability to say, we're going to pay a little bit more to offset the cost, because we're not in the plan is not in the medical business. They're not in the insurance business. But insurance costs or medical costs are what they are. They're escalating what they are. There has also been, in the past, cases where plan design took into account medical costs, and because medical costs, when a portion of the benefit was labeled a medical benefit, then from an IRS standpoint, calculating against the 415 limits, it was changed to a lifetime annuity as opposed to a simple straight-up deal. So that, for all practical purposes, those rules still exist today. And circumstances may change over time to where that limits a plan's ability to have flexibility to go beyond inflation. I'm sorry. So that's my cautionary statement on tying it to not exceed inflation. On number 10, the employer, what you ended up with, essentially the employer shall provide death and disability. That could be construed as in my plan, the plan provides a death and disability benefit. Members could say, well, the PRB says that the employer is supposed to provide this. So let's carve this out of the plan and take whatever money that the plan is spending on the actuarial cost to provide this benefit and reallocate that in another way and force the hand of the employer to provide that disability or that death and disability. It may be a stretch, but I'm just giving you considerations. And all of these things, while talked about in the context of its guidelines, I would challenge anyone here to look me in the eye and not have reasonable consideration, or it's not too far-fetched to think that somebody may latch onto this and go, man, that's a good idea. We need to make this into a law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stacy. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on these? Welcome.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
Lois Emerson with CPS Energy in San Antonio. And kind of in keeping with his thought process there, I don't know if consideration could be given to, I have no problem with any of the guidelines, but if instead of should language, change it to encourage the plan sponsor or the employer to design a plan which blah, 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 blah. Encourage language is not as likely to turn into somebody saying, oh, it should be this. We'll pass a law to make it this. And so I just want to, I think each one of these principles can be redesigned with the word encourage. And you have used it in some places. So I think any place where it says should, if we could change the wording to encourage these kind of principles, I think it might help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a comment, real quickly. I mean, I think the just to be clear with folks, the origin of trying to come up with these guidelines is because we were actually worried about people pulling levers on benefit design that were going in were bad. So putting bad things into law. So the intent of this was to set some goalposts around what is allowable whenever changes were being made, with some acknowledgement that there are lots of changes being made out there, I think was part of our motivating premise. So I agree with Mr. Stacy that these will have, we hope that these will have influence, and we hope that we're drawing goalposts that are reasonable and don't go too far, is kind of what we're trying to do. So I agree with that. And I think the should language is fine. The one thing that we may want to think about on the, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here.
Go ahead.
Instead of not to exceed actual inflation, we said linked to in the previous version. I'm fine with linked to. As long as there's some consideration of actual inflation, I don't know that I care that much whether it.
I guess from his comments, I was a little bit unclear as to whether or not it was just the cost of living adjustments that would be linked to the inflation, or since we've merged 8 and 9 together.
Oh, it probably takes care of that, right? What did we say? Can somebody who actually wrote this down read back to us what we actually said?
The merged 8 and 9.
Retirement benefits should be protected against erosion of the value of the benefit from inflation, and such benefits should be funded in accordance with the PRB guidelines.
And
And should
not exceed.
Actual rate of inflation.
And Josh is suggesting we switch should not exceed to link to.
Yep, to the original language.
It's fine with me. Stephanie, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I guess my question was whether or not we had intended for going back to the other ways in which retirement benefits could be protected against the erosion of the value, if all of those considerations are being linked to not to exceed inflation, or if it's just COLAs that are being linked to not to exceed.
I think that every form, anything that is meant to keep the benefit from being eroded by inflation, should be funded in accordance with our guidelines and linked to inflation. So I think anything that is meant to provide that kind of protection to the benefit should be linked to actual inflation.
I agree with that.
Okay.
We didn't finish up public comment because I jumped in.
Are you referring to the should be?
What's that? Oh.
Which are you suggesting we didn't finish up on?
Oh, we just didn't say, does anybody else have public comment? I just kind of jumped in.
Okay. Anybody else? Last call. Okay. Comfortable with where we are? Any changes you wish to make, Stephanie?
I'm comfortable with where we are.
I am as well. We made progress.
I agree.
I'm a little heartbroken that we don't have like 10 principles of retirement plan design.
We got it to 12.
We did get it to 12.
Where do we go from here on in?
If the members wish, they can entertain a motion to direct staff to finalize the draft to be presented to the board at the June meeting.
Would we have more public comment?
We can solicit comments at the June board meeting, or make these changes and have another round of public comments, but we'll generate the same.
So, members of the committee, have we had enough public comment in terms of written comments like we got here? Have we given the public ample opportunity to weigh in?
I believe we have. I mean, I think from the comments that we received today after this work session, I feel comfortable.
I'm comfortable as well, as long as we make sure that we allow public comment prior to adopting these at the June board meeting.
I agree with that. Okay, so I would entertain a motion that this committee recommend to the full board the principles of retirement plan design as presented and amended here.
So moved.
Seconded.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It passes. So these, as amended, will be sent to the full board for its consideration. And staff will draft these as you've understood us to have amended them, and we'll have a chance to see them before they go to the full board, right?
Correct.
And it might be valuable to, in some way, publicly post those once you guys have finalized and prior to developing the packet, just so there's a little longer on this piece of it.
I think that's a good idea. We'll do that.
Thank you for that suggestion. I believe that is all of the business we're scheduled for today. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved,
Seconded.
seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Thank you all very much for being here.